My straight coworker booked the small room. 5 minutes, he said, closing the door. It was just another Tuesday at the office, one of those days where the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz a little louder than usual and the air conditioning couldn't quite keep up with the summer heat. Our office, a modern open-concept space with glass partitions and minimal privacy, had only one truly private area, what we all called the small room. Technically, it was a conference room designed for intimate meetings or phone calls that required discretion, but over time, it had taken on a mythology of its own. The small room was where people went to receive bad news from HR, where tears were shed over professional disappointments, and occasionally, where workplace romances blossomed away from prying eyes. The walls weren't completely soundproof, but they muffled conversations enough that you could speak freely without broadcasting to the entire department. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Alex, 3 years into my marketing career at Horizon Media, where I've carved out a comfortable niche creating digital campaigns for clients who rarely appreciate how much work goes into a single social media post. I'm openly gay at work, not in a rainbow flag on my desk kind of way, but everyone knows, and it's never been an issue. Then there's Daniel, my straight coworker who had just booked the small room. Daniel joined the company about 8 months ago, transferring from our West Coast office. He's the kind of person who instantly puts others at ease. Confident without being arrogant, funny without trying too hard, and genuinely interested in what others have to say. We clicked immediately, developing the kind of easy friendship that makes long work days bearable. The small room had its own booking system separate from the larger conference rooms. You could reserve it through the company calendar, but more often than not, people just used it impromptu when needed. It wasn't unusual to see someone duck in there for a personal call or to have a moment of quiet in our otherwise bustling workspace. What was unusual was for someone to specifically ask another person to join them there, especially with the cryptic promise of 5 minutes. In workplace parlance, 5 minutes could mean anything from an actual brief conversation to an hour-long discussion that would fundamentally alter your career trajectory. When Daniel caught my eye across the office that morning, gestured toward the small room, and mouthed 5 minutes, I felt a curious mixture of confusion and anticipation. We had been working together on a major campaign for a fitness app launch, spending long hours side by side, occasionally brushing arms as we both reached for the same reference material, sharing lunch breaks where conversations drifted from professional to personal and back again. There had been moments, fleeting instances where his gaze lingered a beat too long, or when laughter between us would fade into a charged silence, that made me wonder if I was imagining something that wasn't there. The office culture at Horizon was generally progressive. We had diversity initiatives, the occasional awkward but well-intentioned sensitivity training, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. But unspoken workplace attractions existed in a gray area of professional ethics that no HR manual could fully address. I had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries with Daniel, never allowing my appreciation for his company to cross into territory that might make him uncomfortable. After all, he had mentioned an ex-girlfriend in passing, and I had no reason to believe he was anything but straight. As I made my way to the small room, I found myself smoothing my shirt and running a hand through my hair, automatic gestures betraying a nervousness I didn't want to acknowledge. The glass door was frosted for privacy, but I could see Daniel's silhouette already inside, pacing slightly. I knocked lightly before entering, professional courtesy, even though he was expecting me. "Hey, what's up?" I asked, aiming for casual as I stepped inside. The small room lived up to its name, barely 10 feet square, with a round table that could seat 4 people comfortably, 5 if you didn't mind knocking knees. The walls were a neutral beige, the lighting softer than the harsh fluorescence of the main office. A single window looked out onto the city skyline, partially obscured by the neighboring office building. Daniel turned when I entered, and I immediately sensed something was different. There was a tension in his shoulders, a seriousness in his expression that I wasn't accustomed to seeing. "Thanks for coming," he said, closing the door behind me with a soft click. 5 minutes, that's all I need. The small room suddenly felt even smaller. The air between us seemed to thicken with unspoken words. I took a seat at the table, partly to establish some distance, partly because my legs felt unexpectedly unsteady. Daniel remained standing, leaning against the door as if to ensure no one would interrupt us. "Everything okay with the campaign?" I ventured, assuming this must be about work. We had a presentation to the client in 3 days, and there were still some elements that needed refinement. Perhaps he had identified a problem that needed immediate attention. The campaign's fine, he said, waving away my question. This isn't about work. Well, not directly. He paused, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times when he was working through a complex problem. I've been wanting to talk to you about something personal, and I can never seem to find the right moment. My heart rate quickened. In my experience, something personal in a workplace context rarely led to comfortable conversations. Had I crossed a line somewhere without realizing it? Was he uncomfortable with my sexuality after all, despite months of seemingly easy friendship? I value our professional relationship, Daniel continued, choosing his words with uncharacteristic care. And I wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. But I also believe in being honest about my feelings. The word feelings hung in the air between us. I remained silent, unsure where this was heading and unwilling to make assumptions that might make an already awkward situation worse. I've never been in this position before, he said, finally moving to sit across from me at the table. I've always thought of myself as straight. My whole life, I've only dated women. But lately, I've been. He trailed off, searching for the right words. I've been questioning things. About myself. About what I want. The small room's silence seemed to amplify as I processed what he was saying. Was this heading where it seemed to be heading? I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to project my own hopes or fears onto his confession. Working with you these past months has been confusing for me, Daniel admitted. I find myself looking forward to our meetings more than any others. I catch myself thinking about our conversations after work, and I've realized that what I'm feeling isn't just professional respect or friendship. He looked directly at me then, his usual confidence replaced by vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I'm attracted to you, Alex, and I have no idea what to do about that. The confession hung between us, reshaping the air in the small room, transforming the space into something entirely new. This wasn't at all what I had expected when he had mouthed 5 minutes across the office. I had imagined project concerns, deadline adjustments, maybe even office gossip, not a sexual identity crisis centered around attraction to me. I don't expect anything from you, Daniel quickly added, filling the silence. I know this is probably uncomfortable, and the last thing I want is to make our work environment weird. If you want to pretend this conversation never happened, I completely understand. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, aware that my response would significantly impact not just our professional relationship, but Daniel's personal journey as well. First of all, thank you for trusting me enough to share this. I began carefully. That couldn't have been easy. Daniel exhaled slowly, some of the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. It wasn't. I've been rehearsing this conversation in my head for weeks. How long have you been feeling this way? I asked, genuinely curious about his process. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. It wasn't a sudden realization. More like gradually becoming aware of something that was probably there for a while. Remember that night we stayed late to finish the concept boards for the fitness app? I nodded. About a month ago, we had worked until nearly midnight, ordering takeout and bouncing ideas off each other as the office emptied around us. It had been one of those rare creative sessions where everything clicked, where our collaborative energy seemed to generate ideas neither of us would have conceived alone. Something shifted for me that night, Daniel continued. We were so in sync, finishing each other's sentences, building on each other's ideas. When we finally wrapped up and said goodnight in the parking garage, I almost. He paused, a flush creeping up his neck. I almost leaned in to kiss you. The impulse was so strong and so unexpected that it scared me. I spent the next few weeks trying to convince myself it was just the euphoria of creative success or sleep deprivation or anything other than actual attraction. I remembered that night clearly, the satisfaction of good work completed, the comfortable exhaustion, the lingering moment in the parking garage that I had attributed to mutual professional appreciation. Had there been something more that I'd missed? Or had I subconsciously registered his interest and dismissed it as impossible? I don't know what I'm asking for here, Daniel admitted. I'm not even sure what I want. I just knew I needed to be honest with you before these feelings started affecting our work. The 5 minutes he had initially requested had long since elapsed. Outside the small room, the office continued its normal Tuesday rhythm. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, colleagues chatting by the coffee machine, all oblivious to the conversation reshaping my understanding of the past 8 months. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally. And I want to be honest with you too. I've always found you attractive, Daniel. But I made assumptions about your sexuality that led me to put those feelings aside professionally. His eyes widened slightly. So you felt something too? Yes, I admitted. But I've been in situations before where I've misinterpreted signals from straight colleagues, and it never ends well. I value our working relationship too much to risk making you uncomfortable. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Well, that makes this both easier and more complicated, doesn't it? The atmosphere in the small room shifted again, the tension transforming into something with potential rather than anxiety. Still, the practical realities of workplace relationships loomed large in my mind. We need to be careful here, I cautioned. Office relationships are complicated even under normal circumstances. Add in your uncertainty about your sexuality and the fact that we're in the middle of a major project together. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I know. Believe me, I've thought about all the ways this could go wrong. That's partly why it took me so long to say anything. So what are you thinking? I asked, genuinely curious about what he envisioned happening next. He leaned back in his chair, some of his usual confidence returning. I'm thinking we should finish the fitness app campaign first. Keep things professional at work. But maybe after the presentation on Friday, we could grab dinner somewhere away from the office? Just to talk more about this without the pressure of getting back to our desks in 5 minutes. His suggestion was reasonable, maintaining professional boundaries while creating space to explore the personal connection between us. It acknowledged both the attraction and the complications, without rushing into territory that could jeopardize our careers or emotional well-being. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded despite the fluttering in my chest. Dinner on Friday sounds good. Daniel's smile widened, relief and anticipation mingling in his expression. Great. I know a place downtown. Good food. Quiet enough for conversation. A knock on the door interrupted the moment, followed by our team leader's voice. Sorry to disturb, but the client's on the line with some questions about the campaign timeline. Reality intruded on our private conversation, reminding us both that beyond the small room lay professional obligations and expectations. Daniel stood, straightening his shirt. We'll be right out, he called, then turned back to me. I guess our 5 minutes are up. I rose as well, oddly reluctant to leave the cocoon of honesty we'd created in the small room. For now, I agreed. But we'll have more time on Friday. As Daniel reached for the door handle, he paused. Thank you, Alex. For listening. For not making this weird. Nothing to thank me for, I replied. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you booked the small room today. We stepped back into the office, returning to our roles as colleagues working on a campaign, the private conversation temporarily set aside, but not forgotten. The rest of the day passed in a blur of client calls, design revisions, and team meetings. Outwardly normal, but underscored by a new awareness between us. Occasional glances across the conference table carried additional meaning, casual conversations layered with subtext only we understood. The following days leading up to Friday were exercises in professional compartmentalization. We focused on perfecting the campaign presentation, our creative partnership undiminished by the personal revelations shared in the small room. If anything, there was a new efficiency to our collaboration, as if the honesty between us had removed a barrier I hadn't realized was there. When Friday finally arrived, the presentation to the client went better than expected. Our concept was approved with minimal revisions, earning congratulations from the department head and relieved celebrations from the rest of the team. As the office happy hour kicked off in the main conference room, Daniel caught my eye across the crowd and nodded slightly toward the exit, a silent reminder of our dinner plans. I made my excuses to colleagues, claiming a previous engagement, and met Daniel in the parking garage, the same location where, a month earlier, he had almost kissed me without my knowledge. Ready? He asked, keys in hand, looking both nervous and excited. Ready, I confirmed, realizing that whatever happened next, our relationship had already fundamentally changed from that moment in the small room when he'd said 5 minutes and closed the door. The restaurant he had chosen was indeed perfect, a small Italian place with secluded booths and ambient lighting that invited conversation. Away from the office environment, Seated across from each other with glasses of wine, we began the longer, deeper conversation that the small room had only initiated. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Tuesday," Daniel admitted after we'd ordered, "about what this means for how I see myself." "And what conclusions have you reached?" I asked, genuinely curious about his process of self-discovery. He twirled the stem of his wine glass thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I need to label it right now. What I know is that I'm attracted to you. Your mind, your perspective, the way you approach problems creatively. And yes, physically too." A slight flush colored his cheeks at this admission. "Whether that makes me bisexual or something else doesn't seem as important as being honest about what I'm feeling in this moment." His answer surprised me with its maturity. So many people I'd known had struggled with rigid categories and definitions during their coming out process. Daniel's comfort with ambiguity suggested an emotional intelligence that made him even more attractive to me. "That's a healthy way to look at it," I said. "Sexuality can be fluid for some people. The labels are less important than the genuine connections." Our conversation flowed easily from there, moving between serious discussions of what a relationship between us might look like professionally and personally, to lighter topics that reminded us why we enjoyed each other's company in the first place. By the time dessert arrived, it felt as if we'd known each other far longer than 8 months. "So where do we go from here?" Daniel asked as we waited for the check, the question that had been underlying our entire evening. I considered my answer carefully. "I think we take it slow, get to know each other outside of work, see if what we're feeling holds up beyond the office environment." He nodded, reaching across the table to briefly touch my hand. Our first intentional physical contact that wasn't accidental or professionally necessary. "I'd like that." "And at work?" "At work, we stay professional," I said firmly. "The fitness app campaign won't be our last project together, and I don't want our personal relationship to compromise our creative partnership." "Agreed," Daniel said, his expression serious. "I value our work together too much to risk that." As we left the restaurant and stood in the parking lot, there was a moment of uncertainty, the awkward transition point of any first date, amplified by the complexity of our situation. Daniel solved it by simply asking, "Can I kiss you goodnight?" I've been wondering what it would be like since that night in the parking garage. The honesty of his question made me smile. "Yes," I said simply. The kiss was brief but certain, no hesitation or tentativeness in the way he leaned in, one hand lightly resting on my shoulder. When we separated, his expression was one of discovery rather than confusion. "Worth the wait?" I asked, only half joking. His smile was answer enough. "Definitely worth booking the small room for." In the weeks that followed, we navigated the dual tracks of our relationship with careful attention to boundaries. At work, we maintained professional distance, channeling our personal connection into creative collaboration that actually improved our campaigns. Outside the office, we gradually built something meaningful, dinner dates becoming weekend hikes, conversations deepening beyond work and into family histories, future aspirations, personal philosophies. Daniel continued his journey of self-discovery at his own pace, sometimes sharing insights, sometimes processing privately. I gave him the space to explore without pressure, appreciating his willingness to be vulnerable and honest about his uncertainties. 3 months after that fateful meeting in the small room, we found ourselves there again, this time for a legitimate 5-minute conversation about a project timeline. As we wrapped up our discussion, Daniel smiled at the memory. "Best 5 minutes I ever requested," he said, nodding toward the door he had closed behind us that Tuesday. I couldn't help but agree. 5 minutes that changed everything. As we returned to our desks, I reflected on how a simple request in a workplace setting had altered the course of both our lives. The small room, with its neutral beige walls and uncomfortable chairs, had become the unlikely setting for the beginning of our story, proof that meaningful connections can form in the most ordinary of places, often when we least expect them. What had started with my straight coworker booked the small room. 5 minutes, he said. Closing the door had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. And while I didn't know exactly where our relationship would lead in the future, I was grateful for those 5 minutes that had stretched into something far more significant than a brief workplace conversation. Total _char_count. 18,463.